morning. On the preaching rota that we put together, it looks like I'm doing the third Sunday. So welcome to Third Sunday with Dave. It'll be the same next month as well. We're going to be continuing our series on what it means to be Christ-like. What it means to have the characteristics of Christ grow in us and work in us and through us, enabling us to be more like Jesus, but also working through us to show the world, show our neighbourhood and each other what God is like. These characteristics that we're looking at from Matthew chapter 5 are, in this particular place, they're called the Beatitudes. And that's part of the Sermon of the Mount, which covers 3 chapters, chapters 5, 6 and 7 in Matthew. But for me, it's like these Beatitudes, it's like the introduction to the rest of the sermon. And what the rest of the sermon does, it then kind of pads out some of these characteristics. I'm not actually going to be using any of the rest of the sermon on the Mount in this preach, but that's what it looks like to me. And so we've done the first two already. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, or blessed, for they will inherit the earth. There we go. So that's what we're going to be looking at this morning. And not so surprisingly, it actually ties in with pretty much everything else that has gone on in our service. I love it how God does that, how he brings different elements, things from different people, and just brings it all together to make it complete, make it perfect in him. Now for me, this is one of the most difficult Beatitudes to understand. And one reason is because it uses the word meek. You know, that common everyday word that we have in our language, that we discuss over coffee and, you know, when we talk about meekness, and it's just not a word we use these days, is it? And because of that as well, if you look at an old translation of the Bible, something like the King James Version that's been around a long time, you'll find the word meek in that Bible 29 times. I'm using the NIV version. It only appears in the NIV 4 times. You think, well, does that mean somebody's got it wrong or something's changed over the years? Just simply because our understanding of words has changed and how we use words in modern language has changed. Yet here, meek has remained. It hasn't been changed to humble or gentle like a lot of the other meeks have in the rest of the Bible. I thought, I don't really know much about this word meek, so I'll Google it. I thought I'd put in meek definition, and this is what came back. Quiet, gentle, and easily imposed on. Submissive. And this is the example it gave in terms of its use. She brought her meek little husband along. Isn't that great? And what this does, it shows what the current mainstream understanding of the word meek is. And it doesn't really make it sound appealing at all, does it? You know, blessed are you who are imposed upon. Blessed are the meek husbands, for they will be put in their place. And so the idea is that we think that meekness is a bit like a doormat, someone to be walked over. And who wants to be like that? Well, it goes against our culture, doesn't it? We live in a world that measures people by, well, ability to conquest. We're talking about more than conquerors. But the world measures people by their ability to conquest, have possessions, and take more for ourselves. A world that's governed by how much we can gain. Bigger house, bigger car, better investments, more fame, more social media friends. More of my footprint on this world. More me. So how can it be a blessing to be meek? And more than that, Jesus says it's the meek that inherit the earth. So those who do not pursue gain for themselves actually get the lot. It doesn't make sense. You are blessed if you are meek. And if you are meek, then the earth will be your inheritance. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. So what we need to do to help us with this, I think, is think about what is Jesus meaning by meek? What does this word meek actually mean? Is it this definition that Google gave me, or is there more to this word than kind of meets the eye initially? There's this word, let's see if I can get it up on here. Yeah. Praus. Do you want to have a go at saying that? After 3? 1, 2, 3. Praus. Oh, thank you. It's a Greek word. It's the word that is translated into meek in this particular place. But for those of us that speak more than one language, you understand that sometimes there's a word in that particular language which doesn't really translate. It's a word that doesn't fit. It doesn't have a literal translation. It has a kind of a best fit. It has something that kind of works but doesn't quite do it justice. And this is one of those words. It's thought of as a difficult to translate word. So what the people do who come across words like this in the Bible, they look to understand the context that the word is used in everyday language. So it describes a gentle breeze. Praus describes a gentle breeze. Sailors would, when they're out on the sea and there was a gentle breeze, they would use that word to describe the wind. Farmers would use it to describe a broken-in colt, or a tame rhinoceros, or something like that. You can use it to describe an animal that is a wild animal and would be crazy otherwise, but has since been tamed. And people also use it to describe a wound that has been soothed. So something that could be causing pain and infection and disease to the body, but, again, it's been tamed, it's been soothed. And so with that in mind, we came to the conclusion, or we didn't, the translators came to the conclusion that the best word that fits all of that is the word meek. But it seems to be much more about something that has power or potential for power, but to be under control. Like a horse that can plough a field or cause damage, jump fences, run wild, yet is tame. And this begins to sort of help us understand a little bit about Jesus when he describes of himself in Matthew 11 and verse 29. He says this. I'll actually read from 28. He says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Now, if you're saying, where's the word meek there? Well, the word praus is actually in here. Where it says in verse 29, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle." That word gentle is Jesus using this same word. He's using this word to describe himself. So does Jesus fit into this category of someone who is imposed upon, someone who is like a doormat, someone who is considered weak? See, he commanded the wind and the waves. He drove out demons. He healed people. He out-argued the Pharisees and lawgivers. He made a whip and turned tables, yet is meek. How come? How does that work? Well, in Philippians chapter 2, it helps us understand this a bit more. So, Philippians chapter 2, verses 5 to 8. The first bit just kind of contextualizes it, but it says, "In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross." So this Jesus, this Lord of ours, that was there before the beginning of time, through whom all things have been created and are created. He chose to give up his majestic heavenly dwelling and become like us for our benefit, so we could have a relationship with God. It was for our benefit he did it, not for his. And although all power and authority were his, he chose to limit himself for our blessing. Thank you. I just realised I was like slides ahead. So his meekness, I think, could therefore be described much more as being obedient to God rather than self-interest. Instead of wanting him to put his own foot and his own stamp on the world, he was there to reveal the Father. Now, when I was preparing this, I came across a bit which I would describe as anti-meekness. A complete opposite of meekness. And that's just a brief bit in Luke chapter 9. I was thinking, do I include that or not? I don't know. It's just kind of funny. Luke chapter 9, verses 51 to 56 says this. As the time approached for him to be taken up to heaven, Jesus resolutely set out for Jerusalem. And he sent messengers on ahead who went into a Samaritan village to get things ready for him. But the people there did not welcome him because he was heading for Jerusalem. When the disciples, James and John, saw this, they asked, "Lord, do you want us to call fire down from heaven to destroy them?" But Jesus turned and rebuked them. Then he and his disciples went to another village. Whether they had that power or not, I do not know. Jesus certainly did. And so these people that weren't really listening to God's message, like, well, let's just burn them. I mean, imagine if that was Jesus' response to the world. Praise the Lord, it's not. Otherwise, most of us, actually probably all of us, would be burning. It's actually through grace that we are saved. And this here is kind of the opposite of meekness, this passage. It's using the power you have to lord stuff over people. But Jesus chooses not to. It's thought that when Jesus was talking about the meek inheriting the earth, that he was actually referring to something written in one of the Psalms, Psalm 37. I'll actually read that. Psalm 37 is quite a long psalm, so I'll just read the first 120 verses. No, the first 11 verses. It only has 40 verses in total. Psalm 37, "Do not fret because of those who are evil, or be envious of those who do wrong. For like the grass, they will soon wither. Like green grass, they will soon die away. Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and enjoy safe pasture. Take delight in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way to the Lord. Trust in him, and he will do this. He will make your righteous reward shine like the dawn, your vindication like the noonday sun. Be still before the Lord. Wait patiently for him. Do not fret when people succeed in their ways, when they carry out their wicked schemes. Refrain from anger and turn from wrath. Do not fret, it leads only to evil. For those who are evil will be destroyed, but those who hope in the Lord will inherit the land. Those who hope in the Lord will inherit the land. A little while and the wicked will be no more. Though you look for them, they will not be found. But the meek will inherit the land and enjoy peace and prosperity." It's another one of those rare occasions in the modern translation of the Bible where the word meek appears. There's a lot of stuff in these verses, but there's a few common things associated with being meek. Trust in the Lord. Delight in him. Commit your way to the Lord. Be still before the Lord. Put your hope in the Lord. And that is contrasted by not fretting or worrying about what's going on with other people. It's about giving yourself over to God. It's about putting God first. Trusting him for all we need. And for who we are. Those who hope in the Lord, the meek, are those who inherit the land. Which, that word for land can also be earth. There's a very famous book that's been written about this. I didn't hear your sermon from last week, Sam, yet. Sorry. But I was here for Nigel's, and he quoted from Dr. Martin Lloyd-Jones's Studies in the Sermon on the Mount. It's quite a thick book. And you think anyone who describes a book as being thick doesn't like reading. But it's a good read. It really looks at the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes, as well as the beginning section in great depth. He talks of meekness not being a personality trait. So sometimes we can think of meekness as someone who is lowly and looks at their feet all the time as they walk. And that's just what they're like. This is someone who is humanly, as it were, meek. But he says it's not that. It's about a deliberate decision, and is therefore compatible with great authority and power. It is someone who does not make demands for privileges, possessions, status, or power. A meek person is teachable, never pities him or herself, someone who denies themselves and yet is always satisfied. He concludes by saying that someone who is meek is someone who is already content. Someone who is meek is someone who is already content. I need to move on. Paul in Philippians, he talks about the secret of contentment. And I often wonder what that meant. What does it mean to be content? So how can we become meek? How do we become meek? Does that mean we need to actually be those people who walk around staring at our feet? It's actually not something we can do naturally. Because actually naturally we crave the opposite of meekness normally. It's not about just choosing to be okay with everything and then hoping you'll feel fine. It's about Jesus. It's about intimacy with God and our willingness to be transformed into his likeness. It's about submitting to him, choosing to put him first in all things. Matthew 16:24 says, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny himself, take up the cross, and follow me." We can't do it. It's not about me. You know, we are sinners. Martin Lloyd-Jones describes us as the vilest of sinners. He uses very strong words. And he would also say that God would use even stronger words about us. You know, we try and think and pretend that we're good. But even if we can do that for a little while to each other on a Sunday morning, our thoughts are warped. And that is the position when we are poor in spirit. And we need to admit that. We need to be honest with ourselves and with God that we cannot do it. And then we need to submit ourselves to God. So we can see ourselves in the light of his grace. And how loving he is towards us, despite us being the vilest of sinners. I mean, we joke about it, but sometimes we need to take sin more seriously than we do. Maybe all the time, actually. And when we see ourselves in the context, see our sin in the context of God's love for us, then the fruit of meekness begins to be produced in our lives. We then stop craving for how much of me can I put onto this world. We just crave more for Jesus because we know how much we need him. We know how much we need him to be in our lives because we can't do it. And the consequence of this is that the earth is ours. We inherit the earth. We can only inherit something after somebody's died. Inheritance comes after a death. But Jesus has died. He died on the cross so we can be right with God, so this vile sin can be dealt with, so that God's grace can be manifest in our lives. And the result of this? Well, Revelation 21 talks about there being a new heaven and a new earth. And that is, for me, that's really exciting. I can't wait. I'm really looking forward to it. I mean, imagine the earth without any sin, without any suffering and all of that. Anyway, I need to not go off on a tangent. It's just great stuff. So there's that future earth that Jesus is talking about. But he's also talking about the earth now. He is actually talking about us putting a footprint on the earth when we go. It's about us taking Jesus. He says the earth is yours. Go into all the world and make disciples. The earth, it's yours. Dirham, it's ours. If we are meek, if we submit ourselves to God, if we put him first in all things, we can have dirham for Jesus. How do we get that? Intimacy with God. Nigel sent out a little, I don't know what you call it, excerpt from a book to us who are going to be preaching about this over the next few weeks or so. And the one he sent about blessed are the meek is just great. So I'm going to read it out. I can't really do a précis version of this. It's just great. And it's by a guy called Karl Martin from his book Stand. So it says this: Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Bizarre. Those who don't want to inherit the earth get it all. This is genius. It flies in the face of the prevailing wind of our culture. Our culture says, look out for number one, and then we do. Our world says we have rights, and so we want them, but we don't want responsibilities. Our world says, blessed are the social climbers, the go-getters, the conquerors. But somehow it doesn't work. It's never enough. Our world cannot satisfy us. As Jesus grows in us, we will become meek. Not so much a Moses sandaled meekness, but something inherently powerful, something brought utterly under control, a wild stallion broken in. It's not a passive meekness, it's not a kind of niceness, not about not wanting to be any trouble to anyone, not about apologizing for being there or being happy with whatever anyone else wants. It's not a British middle-class meekness. Jesus' example was not a weak meekness. He constantly confronted the religious leaders, flouting their religious laws and turning over tables. There are things we can stand up to and say no to, but Jesus also consistently talks about selling all you have, giving to the poor, turning the other cheek, losing your life to find it. And his example is obedience unto death. No, this meekness is an active laying down of our lives, a relentless reaching out for God and not settling for anything less. This meekness is something strong and powerful. When Jesus grows in you, you will stand strong. Now, when I'm praying about this, God really impressed on me that we need to respond to what it means to be meek. We need to respond. And it really, again, fits in with what's been going on this morning. So if the band could come up, and that would be great. So if meekness comes from the laying down of our lives to God, then it's really likely, and I include myself in this, that there are areas of our lives that we're holding back from Him. It's very likely. Whether it's just a little thing, or whether it's a big thing, or whether it's your whole life. So if we could, if you're able to and want to, if you could stand. And we're going to respond by, and remember, this is a choice. You know, God wants people to choose to follow Him. That's the whole point of free will. So if you're willing, and if there's something in your mind, I believe there probably is, there's something in your mind that you think, I'm not giving this over to God, I want to. Then if you just hold your hands out, and imagine that thing in your hands, if you can, and that you are going to surrender it to God. So let's just hold our hands out if you've got something to surrender to God. And I'll pray, and then we'll sing together our final song as part of this act of surrender as well. If for some reason you can't hold out your hands but want to be part of this, then just picture it in your mind, that's fine. So Lord, you've been talking to us a lot today about giving you our all, about handing ourselves, our lives, all that we are to you. And those of us who have thought about that and think, actually, what a crazy thing that is to do, but also what a great thing that is to do. Maybe it feels like a risk, but there is nothing better than jumping into Jesus. So Lord, as we stand here with our hands held out, we say, take this part of my life, take this part of our lives. We surrender who we are to you. We surrender these things to you and say, have your way with us, Lord. And may we receive something back from you in place. Lord, fill us full of your Spirit. Empower us. Enable us to have greater intimacy with you, that meekness may grow in us, that we would be able to fully submit to you. Help us with this. For we ask it in your mighty name, Jesus. Amen.